Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Sunday, April 20th, 2025, and on Sundays, we look into the purpose and meaning of life. This is a very special Sunday, so I'm wishing everyone a happy Easter, no matter who you are, regardless of your faith or your belief system. Now, Easter obviously holds special meaning for Christians as the commemoration of the resurrection of Jesus in fulfillment of the prophecies. So Easter represents Jesus Christ's triumph of life over death. Again, this is within the Christian tradition, so that for Christians everywhere then, Easter signifies the fulfillment of God's plan for redemption and offers believers a promise of eternal life. Now, I recall when I was growing up, we would sing these various hymns at church, right? And so one of them was precisely along these lines. So it kind of went something like this. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will never die. So, yeah, it's funny because it wasn't that I used to sing a lot in church or what have you, but you hear these things over and over again, and eventually it just sort of sticks in your mind, right? So that was one of the songs that I remember vividly singing in church growing up. Now, of course, there's another crucial part of the story that precedes Christ's own resurrection, okay? And from which those words from the actual hymn came. The resurrection of Lazarus, told mainly in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. So Martha and Mary's brother, Lazarus, was a dear friend of Jesus, okay? And he died, that is, Lazarus had died in Bethany and was buried inside a tomb. So upon his return to Bethany, Jesus spoke to the grief-stricken Martha as follows, quote, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he dies, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And Martha responded, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Again, this is from John chapter 11, verses 23 to 27. And so then, as you may or may not know, Jesus stood before Lazarus' tomb and commanded him to come out, which he did, and thereby revealed himself yet again to be a sentient, living, breathing human being. His sickness, death, burial, and then rebirth were symbolic then of the emerging Christian faith. And it's arguably the most powerful miracle that Jesus ever performed, but especially because it essentially paved the way for an even greater miracle, that is, Jesus' death and resurrection. And so, in thinking about the fates of Lazarus and Jesus, that's where, in my view, Christianity meets Buddhism and Islam, especially Sufism and Stoicism, among others. So, what's the broader connection of which I speak? Well, let's start with the grief-stricken Martha. Now, she and her sister Mary naturally are devastated by the loss of their dear brother Lazarus. Again, prior to Jesus' miracle. But what do these faith traditions and Stoicism emphasize with respect to humanly death and the pain and suffering that people experience through their losses? Well, each has a different point of emphasis, but I interpret the core principles as follows, okay? We live in an ever-changing world, a world of permanent impermanence. And much of our human suffering stems from our dogged attachments and clinginess to that which ultimately must be impermanent. Right? So, for example, no one wants to lose their mother or father, but inevitably that will happen. No one certainly ever wants to bury their own child, but these things do indeed happen. And there are thousands of other people, places, and events that we might return to or might think about from time to time. longingly, wistfully, at times regretfully. It's all too easy then to end up essentially torturing ourselves, and often those around us, with these thoughts and longings for that which cannot be or can no longer be. So, and that's where we have to be able then to let go, which is not the same thing, by the way, as not caring or not feeling. We are humans, and to be fully human, we have to be able to care and to feel. Rather, it's about being able to accept the impermanence. The common expression, being able to go with the flow, and to use that understanding as a motivating force to energetically pursue our life's purpose and mission. We know that we and our loved ones are not going to live forever in our present form. But that doesn't have to be a source of sadness and anxiety and anger or paralysis. More generally, there are going to be times where we wish we could change the ending of the story. Sometimes we're going to lose people that we care about all too soon or all too abruptly and unexpectedly. We're going to be separated from those that we love. Our bodies start to fail us as we get older. We sometimes feel helpless or hurt or like we're spinning our wheels. All of this is natural in some senses. And these are all these are different aspects of what the Buddhists call dukkha. It's a core teaching of the Buddha. The dukkha means suffering, discontent, feeling unsettled, and hollowness. And the Buddha said, all I teach is suffering and the end of suffering. So suffering doesn't just mean, of course, grave physical pain, although I expect most of us have experienced that from time to time. But rather, it's the pain that's associated with mental suffering, the anguish that we experience. That is our tendency to try to grasp and hold on to the pleasurable, okay, to the fleeting joys, if you will, of nature and of life, but being ignorant of their ultimate transient nature, that is, the impermanence of that which we might quite love and enjoy. And so, of course, Buddhism, I should say, starts with the Four Noble Truths of suffering, the cause of suffering, letting go of suffering, and ultimately the path that leads to the end of suffering, nirvana. And on some level, we all understand this in different ways. All the things that we have, we know we don't really have. All that we see, we can never fully see completely. And yet, we think the opposite. On some level, we realize that we cannot possess everything that we have. We cannot possess our lives, our loves, our identities, our physical possessions. Instead, what we can do then is adapt ourselves to the recognition and the acceptance of this world in motion. And we can then help shape and cope with the inevitable changes that arise, like the sun arising with each new day. And second, these various faith traditions and philosophies all emphasize compassion and kindness and mercy toward those who are suffering, including ourselves. So we all have our challenges in life, our burdens to bear, the unexpected obstacles that we have to overcome. That's almost the definition of life itself. So we're all immersed then in the river of life and our life experiences, much of which lies beyond our direct control. Mostly, all that we can really do is control our reactions, our responses to the currents that are carrying us along in our kayaks, our metaphorical vessels that we call ourselves. We're not the source of the river, and neither can we bend the river to our will. We can instead work at becoming increasingly competent kayakers, I've said this before, to more effectively navigate the challenges, the complexities of the rivers of our lives. And if we can learn then to navigate as expert kayakers with loving kindness and compassion, then we're traversing the right path. We're traversing the river in a way that's nourishing and nurturing our own souls and the souls of everyone whom we might encounter along the way. Okay, and then third, how do we know we're traversing the river of life's challenges and the suffering and so forth successfully or in the right way? So to me, that's our greatest challenge. And it's linked to identifying and establishing our life's mission and purpose. And that's, in my view, what all the truly important or significant faith traditions and the different philosophical schools of thought, they all strive to teach us some variant of this, using their own languages and parables and redemption stories. And that's also why I personally don't get too caught up worrying about which is the right religion or faith or philosophical school of thought. And similarly, I don't spend my energy trying to prove the limitations of certain schools of thought or which is right and which is wrong. First of all, I'm not intelligent enough to do that. But basically, I'm not an expert in these areas. But more than that, the point is that I don't cling tenaciously to my belief systems as a result, or I don't get too annoyed if others don't share the same interpretations or don't see the world the way that I do, or just in general, if they subscribe to different faiths and philosophies. I get that. But the reason that I'm not upset about that, well, there's actually two main reasons for that. So first, clinging tenaciously to anything, including belief systems, usually just leads to more suffering. In other words, it's kind of like saying, if you don't convert to my faith, you're doomed for all eternity. And I must therefore force you infidels to convert, even against your will. Or even with my children, I shall languish in misery and suffer interminably if you don't do what I think you should do. Okay? So the irony then is that while I and we are forever striving to learn and to understand and to become enlightened in the broadest and best sense of that term, we have to be willing at the same time to accept the futility of that endeavor, or at least in an earthly, humanly sense. The river's still going to be there, no matter what. The universe will still be there, no matter what comes. And God will still be there, whatever you think about God, no matter how or why. And then that leads to my final point. And this actually comes from Sufism, although I didn't even really know about Sufism when I first came to understand this particular insight. And I want to explain it from a conversation that I had so many years ago with my late father-in-law, John Tripp, father of my first wife. And so Jan, he and his wife lived in and survived the Second World War in Holland, the Netherlands. And as a result, of course, that Second World War left an indelible mark upon them, their experiences, their impressions, and their philosophies on life. And so a lot of people then who survived that Second World War on mainland Europe, and many of those who directly survived the Holocaust, arrived at different conclusions about the nature of God in the aftermath of such a tragic tragic and devastating war. So some believe that they survived the Holocaust, for example, precisely because of their deep, unwavering faith in God. But others, like my late father-in-law, became atheists. That is, they couldn't fathom that a God could exist and allow for such atrocities and for such suffering. And so the point of this is that my father-in-law then asked me one day about my beliefs. We were just doing some yard work, at his place back in the 1990s. And he knew that, I knew that he didn't believe in God, and I knew that I had a different interpretation, shall we say, and I didn't want to offend him. And that led me to say something along the following lines when he was asking me about my thoughts about God. I said something, again, I'm just kind of paraphrasing or recalling the conversation, something along the lines of, well, like everyone else, I don't really know, obviously, what happens on the other side, or even if we have a soul. And this is what I said to him. But I said, but if God exists, and if there's any kind of judgment, and again, I don't know how any of that would really work, I was always taught, at least growing up, to be kind towards others and to love thy neighbor, right? All that sort of thing. And to try to be the best version of myself with all my flaws and limitations. I said, to try to be a genuinely good person. And you can't really spell good, G-O-O-D, without God, G-O-D. Just a little flippant remark, right? And he laughed. He always liked the idea of a little wordplay, right? He'd see the sign, the road sign up ahead that would say like bump ahead, that little warning. And then he'd go like smack you on the back of your head. And you go, why'd you do that? And he goes, didn't you see the sign? Bump ahead. So yeah, he likes that sort of thing. So anyway, I thought he'd appreciate the good and the God little comparison, whatever. Okay. So anyway, as it turns out then that, in addition to liking that little wordplay thingy, I then shared with him another part of my general emerging philosophy, as it were. So I said something like, well, and even if I'm wrong and there's no God, there's nothing that comes next, what's the worst thing that could happen if I lived the life in the way that I just described? I said, basically, all we'll have done is spend our lives being kind and compassionate people, spreading joy and positive energy wherever we go. What's wrong with that? Right? So whether you're rewarded by God in the end or not, you'll be rewarded for having lived a good life and done all that you can to help people and make the world a better place. So I said, from my view, it's a no-lose proposition, right? That is, whether if God exists, then we'll have lived a life in accordance with what we understood to be the best versions and principles that we should abide by. And even if God doesn't exist, what will we have done? We will have spent all of our lives trying to do good things, make the world a better place, right? So anyway, it turns out that that's almost exactly what Sufis believe about the afterlife. Again, I didn't know this at the time, but that essentially the soul's state after death reflects the experiences and the deeds in this life. And so if we've lived in accordance with the light, if we've bent ourselves towards the light, if we've lived a good life filled with good deeds and kindness, then our souls effectively approach God and divinity, or whatever terms you might like to use to describe the Creator and the universe. And that's where I guess I want to conclude, getting back to thermodynamics, if you will. So we're all energetic beings with varying capacities to direct our energies in the world, regardless of our belief systems. And if we direct those energies in ways that our different faith and philosophical systems truly beseech us to do, then we'll be guided always toward the light and toward some kind of eternal redemption, however you might conceive of that. So the fact that there are people who claim to have deep faith, right? And yet have seemingly turned away from the light, or who act with, these people who say they're deep believers in God or whatever their faith, and they act with cruelty and malice towards others. Well, that doesn't negate their faith systems or somehow prove that their faith systems are wrong or evil. It's those people themselves who are struggling. They're trapped in their own worlds of pain, trapped in their own confused worlds of misunderstanding. And that's been all of us, myself included, right, from time to time. So then it's our jobs to always, and even against all odds, to bend our wills and our spirits and our souls toward the light. To gently remind ourselves when we are wrong. And then at the same time, of course, to gently remind others who are spewing hatred in the name of their belief systems. And to try to rekindle the light that's still there. Somewhere. Again, perhaps buried beneath the trauma or the abuse that they've suffered, or the confused ideas or viruses that have infected their godly vessels. That happens. And so here's a simple test. Do something extraordinarily kind today, even for yourself. Go beyond even what you would normally do. Shine your light in an especially bright and powerful way. And then look at what happens. And when I say look at what happens, I don't just mean in terms of the smiles and the reassurances and the positive feedback that you might get from others. You may or may not. But regardless, look what happens to you, yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Your light inevitably and invariably grows brighter. Conversely, and I'm not recommending this little experiment, what if you do something especially mean or hateful or unkind, or use your energy today in a negative or hurtful way? What happens? You'll see yourself, you'll experience yourself as more diminished, as fading away from the goodness and the light, and further depleted of your energy, and often worse off than when you first started. And so that's my closing wisdom, if you will. We can all strive toward enlightenment, again, in the broadest and best sense of that term, which means, in my view, no matter what your belief, no matter what your background, that we're all behaving heliotropically. That is, we have the choice at every moment to bend ourselves towards the sun, to bend our souls toward the light. We're not the source of the river, and we cannot control the river's currents, but we can traverse the rapids as best we can with the vessels that we've been given. We can let go of the suffering along the way and always look up to see the light and the warmth of the sun, or the light and the warmth of the source of creation, or God. And that's always there. And at least we can try. So until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And may you always and forever be bending yourselves and your souls toward the light. It can't go wrong. Happy Easter.